Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brian was in the garage organizing tools when he heard the front door close. It was Saturday morning, just after 10, and Tessa had left only a few minutes earlier saying she was quickly running to the bakery to buy French bread for lunch. He kept working, sorting wrenches by size, thinking about the kitchen renovation project they planned to start next month. The Denver sun streamed through the garage windows, creating that pleasant weekend feeling he so appreciated after a long week at the engineering office. When he glanced at the clock on the wall, it was 1:20 p.m. Brian frowned. Tessa had been gone for over 3 hours. The bakery was less than a 10-minute drive away. Even if there'd been a line, even if she'd stopped to chat with someone she knew, 3 hours was too long. Way too long. He dropped the tools and went inside the house, washing his hands at the kitchen sink as a strange feeling started to form in his stomach. That's when he heard the key turn in the lock. Tessa hurried in, holding a paper bakery bag. Brian turned to greet her, and the words died in his throat. Her makeup was visibly smudged around her eyes, as if she'd been crying or had rubbed her face hard. Her lipstick was completely smeared, a pale pink blur extending beyond her natural lip line. Her hair, usually neat, was tousled on one side, as though she'd been lying down. Tessa? Brian took a step forward, genuine worry in his voice. What happened? Are you okay? She didn't even look him in the eye. She placed the bread bag on the counter with a sharp motion and headed straight for the stairs to the second floor. Don't ask me anything, she said sharply, coldly, leaving no room for questions. Just, don't ask me anything, Brian. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, watching his wife hurry upstairs and hearing the bedroom door slam shut. Seconds later, the shower turned on. Brian looked at the bread bag on the counter. He opened it slowly. 3 cold French loaves. Completely cold. There was no way they'd just come out of the oven. Those loaves had been bought hours ago. The feeling in his stomach turned heavier, darker. 9 years of marriage. 9 years during which he believed he knew Tessa better than he knew himself. A dedicated nurse, an attentive wife, the woman he'd chosen to build a life with. And now she came home 3 hours after leaving to buy bread, looking like she'd been through something she couldn't or wouldn't explain, telling him not to ask questions. Brian sat down at the kitchen table, his heart racing. Part of him wanted to go upstairs, knock on the bedroom door, and demand answers. But another part, the part that had learned to solve complex engineering problems through careful analysis and concrete evidence, knew he needed more information before any confrontation. He couldn't accuse without certainty. He couldn't blow up based on suspicion alone. He picked up his own phone and opened the shared location app. 2 years ago, after Tessa had a fairly serious car accident coming home from the hospital where she worked a night shift, they decided to share their locations with each other. It was a safety measure, they'd said at the time, so they'd always know where the other was in case of an emergency. Brian had never used the app to monitor Tessa. He'd never had a reason. Until now. With slightly trembling fingers, he pulled up her location history for that morning. The app showed a blue line tracing the route she'd taken. The line started at home, went down the main road for about 2 kilometers toward the neighborhood bakery, but then took an abrupt turn east. It continued for another 6 kilometers before stopping at a residential address in a neighborhood Brian knew well. Knew far too well. It was Owen's house. His younger brother. Brian felt as if someone had punched him hard in the stomach. He stared at his phone screen, at that blue dot that had remained static at that address for exactly 2 hours and 12 minutes. From 10:15 a.m. to 12:27 p.m. After that, the dot began moving back, stopping by the bakery for exactly 8 minutes before returning home. Owen. His brother. The kid he'd helped raise after their father died when Owen was just 15. The brother he'd helped pay for college, the one he'd gotten a job for at an architecture firm through professional contacts, the one who'd been his best man at his wedding to Tessa. Owen, the guy who'd always been a little too charming, always a little too smooth with women, always seemed a bit emotionally reckless, but never someone Brian imagined capable of this. He sat there for a long time, processing the information. The shower had stopped. Tessa was probably getting dressed, likely looking in the mirror, trying to erase any trace of whatever had happened. Brian thought about all the times in recent months that Tessa had seen Owen. Family dinners. The backyard barbecue for their mom's birthday in June. The soccer game they'd all watched together in July. The 4th of July party at her parents' house. The barbecue. That's where it all started, Brian was certain now. 6 months ago. He remembered seeing Tessa and Owen chatting animatedly by the grill while he helped his mom in the kitchen. He'd thought it was nice that his wife and brother got along so well. What a fool he'd been. Brian stood up from the chair, moving almost on autopilot. He walked up the stairs slowly, each step feeling like it weighed a ton. He knocked on the bedroom door. Tessa. I need to talk to you. Now. There was a pause. I'm getting dressed. I don't care. Open this door. Another, longer pause. Then the door opened. Tessa was wearing a blue bathrobe, her wet hair combed back, her face bare of any makeup. She looked younger like that, more vulnerable. But Brian felt no tenderness. Only anger. Where were you? He kept his voice low and controlled. And don't give me that bakery story. Tessa crossed her arms. I already told you not to ask. You were at Owen's house, Brian stated clearly, watching her face. For over 2 hours. Color drained from Tessa's cheeks. Her eyes widened for a split second before she tried to regain her composure. How did you? We share our locations, remember? For our safety. The irony in Brian's voice was as sharp as glass. So I'll ask again, and this time I want the truth. What were you doing at my brother's house for 2 hours on a Saturday morning? Tessa took a step back, gripping her robe tighter. Brian, I can explain. Then explain. He stepped forward into the bedroom and closed the door behind him. Because from where I'm standing, my wife said she was going to buy bread, spent over 2 hours at my brother's house, and came back looking like she'd just, well, exactly like you did when you walked in. Tears began forming in her eyes. It was a mistake. Brian, it was a terrible mistake. How many times? His voice came out louder than he'd intended. How many times, Tessa? She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders starting to shake. I didn't want it to be like this. We didn't plan it. How many times? Brian shouted now, all control slipping away. 6 months. Her voice muffled through her hands. It started at your mom's barbecue. We got to talking, had a few extra beers, and one thing led to another. I swore it would be just once. But then it kept happening. Quick meetings. Always when you were working or traveling. Brian felt his legs go weak. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling. 6 months. Half a year. While he worked to pay the bills, keep the house, plan their future, Tessa had been meeting Owen. His brother. His own family. Does he know? Brian asked, his voice now dangerously calm. Does Owen know you're my wife? Of course he does. Stupid question. He was at our wedding. Brian, please. Get out of my room. He said, still staring at the floor. Go to the guest room. Now. We can talk about this. Now. He roared, standing abruptly. Tessa flinched, startled, and quickly left the room, closing the door behind her. Brian grabbed his phone and called Owen. It rang 4 times before his brother's voice answered, casual and unconcerned. Hey, bro. What's up? Are you home? Brian asked. Yeah, why? Stay there. I'll be there in 15 minutes. And Owen? You'll want to be alone for this conversation. He hung up before Owen could respond. He went downstairs, grabbed his car keys, and left, completely ignoring Tessa calling after him from the living room. The anger inside him was like an engine revving at full throttle, pushing him forward while his mind struggled to process the complete and utter betrayal he'd just uncovered. Owen's place was in a modern condo complex on Denver's east side, a two-bedroom apartment he rented with part of the salary from the architecture firm. Brian parked out front and walked up to the third floor. He knocked hard on the door. Owen opened it with a confused expression that quickly turned to apprehension when he saw Brian's face. Dude, what happened? Brian shoved past him into the apartment and closed the door. You're going to tell me exactly what's going on between you and my wife. And don't even think about lying, I already know. Color washed out of Owen's face. He took 2 steps back, raising his hands defensively. Brian, wait. She was here this morning, Brian continued, advancing. For over 2 hours. And she's been here regularly for the past 6 months. The last 6 months, Owen. While I treated you like a brother, helped you, supported you, you were sleeping with my wife. Owen ran a hand through his hair, panic plain in his eyes. It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned. Oh, it wasn't planned? Brian laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. 6 months isn't an accident, Owen. 6 months is a choice. Every week, every time you met, it was a conscious choice to betray me. Both of you. I know it's wrong, Owen said, his voice breaking. I know. But you don't understand. Tessa and I, we connected. She said you guys weren't doing well, that the marriage was. No. Brian cut him off, raising a finger. Don't put the blame on my marriage. If Tessa wasn't happy, she should have talked to me. And you? You're my brother. My brother. Of all the women in the world, you pick my wife? Owen slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. Brian said, his voice finally cracking a little. You two destroyed everything. 9 years of marriage. 25 years of brotherhood. All for what? A few hours of sex. Heavy silence filled the apartment. Owen couldn't look at Brian. Tears streamed down his face, but Brian felt no pity. Only emptiness. It's over. Brian said finally, his voice returning to that dangerous calm. My marriage to Tessa is over. And you and me? You stopped being my brother today. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I don't want to see you. And you can be sure the whole family will know exactly what kind of person you are. Brian, please. Don't do this. Don't tell Mom, she won't handle it. You should have thought of that first. Brian turned toward the door. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. He left the apartment without looking back, walked down the stairs, and got into his car. He sat there for a few minutes, taking deep breaths, trying to calm the heart pounding in his chest like an out-of-control drum. Then he picked up his phone again and called his lawyer, Mark Chen, his college classmate who now specialized in family law. Mark? Brian Holloway. I need to file for divorce. Monday morning. I have proof of adultery, and I want it done as fast as possible. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Mark asked questions, and Brian answered with dry, straightforward facts. When he hung up, he felt oddly detached from everything, as if he were watching someone else's life fall apart, not his own. He got back home late that afternoon. Tessa was sitting in the living room, still in her robe, eyes red and swollen from crying. She stood up when he walked in. Brian, can we talk? Please. There's nothing to talk about, he said, taking the house key off his keyring and placing it on the coffee table. You'll receive the divorce papers Monday morning. I suggest you get a lawyer. And you'd better start looking for a place to live because you're not staying here. You can't just kick me out of my own house. Technically, yes, I can. The house is in my name, bought before we got married. But don't worry, I'll give you a reasonable deadline. 30 days. Until then, you stay in the guest room and keep your distance from me. Tessa started crying again. I made a terrible mistake. But it's been 9 years, Brian. 9 years together. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything, he replied, his voice finally revealing the pain he felt. It was everything to me. But you chose to throw it away, with my brother. So no, Tessa. It doesn't mean anything anymore. You killed what we had. In the days that followed, Brian told the whole family. The reaction was exactly what he'd expected. Their mother, Margaret, was devastated. She cried for hours after Brian revealed the betrayal. She immediately called Owen, yelling at him over the phone, calling him a disappointment and saying she was ashamed to call him her son. Brian's 2 older brothers, Thomas and Daniel, cut off contact with Owen right away. They removed him from family WhatsApp groups and cancelled his invitations to future events. Owen tried calling Brian dozens of times in the first 2 weeks. He left tearful voice messages begging for forgiveness, pleading for a chance to explain better. Brian deleted them all without listening. He eventually blocked the number. In Colorado, divorce required a minimum 91-day waiting period after filing, but since there were no children and few shared assets, the process was relatively simple. Tessa didn't contest it. She knew there was no defending the indefensible. Brian kept the house, the better car, and most of their savings. She left with little more than she'd brought into the marriage. The hardest part was watching their social life fall apart. Mutual friends had to pick sides. Most stayed with Brian. Some tried to stay neutral, but it was impossible. The story had leaked, as these stories always do, and soon the whole friend group knew what Tessa and Owen had done. Her reputation at the hospital was also affected. Colleagues who'd once been close now treated her with professional coldness. Owen lost his job at the architecture firm 3 months later. Officially, it was restructuring, but Brian knew the truth. The firm's owner had been a close family friend of the Holloways for decades. He'd been at Brian's father's funeral. He wasn't going to keep Owen on staff after learning what he'd done. Months passed slowly. Brian threw himself into work, taking on extra projects and traveling to more distant construction sites, anything to keep his mind busy and away from the pain that still pulsed in his chest like a wound refusing to heal. He started therapy, something he'd never imagined needing, but which proved essential for processing the betrayal and rebuilding his self-worth. It was on a Saturday morning, nearly a year after the discovery, that Brian was at a downtown Denver cafe reviewing blueprints for a new project when he saw Tessa. She was alone at a corner table, absently scrolling through her phone, a cup of cold coffee in front of her. Her hair was shorter, lacking the shine it used to have. She'd lost weight, not in a healthy way, but the kind that stressed out people lose. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. But what caught Brian's attention most was her belly. Tessa was pregnant, probably 5 or 6 months along, judging by the size. She looked up just then, and her eyes met Brian's. For a second, neither moved. Then Tessa raised a hand in a hesitant gesture, almost as if to wave. Brian looked at her for a long moment. He saw the woman he'd loved. He saw the woman who'd betrayed him. He saw a stranger, pregnant and alone in a cafe. He gave a brief, polite nod in return. Then he turned his attention back to the blueprints in front of him, effectively ending any chance of conversation. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Tessa slowly lower her hand, glance at her belly, and return to her phone. Brian stayed at the cafe another 40 minutes, finishing his work. When he finally got up to leave, Tessa was still there, in the same position, staring at her phone screen as if searching for something she couldn't find. He passed her table on his way out. "Take care of yourself, Tessa," he said quietly, without stopping. She looked up quickly. "Brian, wait. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. For everything." He paused, turning partly toward her. "I know. But some mistakes can't be fixed. I hope you find what you're looking for." "Really?" Owen didn't want it, she blurted suddenly, her voice breaking. "When I told him about the baby. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. He blocked me. Won't take my calls." Brian felt a pang of something, not satisfaction exactly, but maybe a recognition that actions truly do have consequences. "I'm sorry you're going through this alone. But I can't help. You understand that, right?" Tessa nodded, wiping away tears that had started to fall. "I understand. I destroyed everything. The best thing I had. For someone who wasn't worth anything." "It wasn't about whether he was worth it or not," Brian said, his voice gentle but firm. "It was about respect. About loyalty. About doing the right thing even when the wrong one is easier. And you both failed at that." He turned and walked out of the cafe, the warm Denver sun hitting his face. As he walked to his car, Brian realized he no longer felt anger. He no longer felt that sharp pain that had dominated his days in those first few months. What he felt was a kind of sad peace, the acknowledgement that this chapter of his life had closed for good. He had a lunch meeting in an hour with a coworker named Sophie, a young engineer who'd joined the firm 6 months ago. They'd gone out to dinner twice, pleasant conversations about architecture, travel, and future plans. Nothing serious yet, but there was potential there. There was a future. Brian got into his car and glanced one last time through the cafe window. Tessa was still sitting there, alone, one hand on her belly, the other holding her phone. She'd made her choices. She'd lost a devoted husband, a family that welcomed her, a stable and happy life. And for what? Secret rendezvous that led to abandonment and loneliness. Owen had lost too. He'd lost his family, his job, his respect. Brian had heard through their mom that Owen had moved to another state, trying to start over where no one knew his story. But stories like that have a way of following people. As Brian drove through Denver's streets toward the restaurant where he'd meet Sophie, he thought about betrayal and forgiveness, broken trust and second chances. He thought about how 9 years of building can crumble on a single Saturday morning when your wife goes out to buy bread and comes back 3 hours later with smudged makeup and lies on her lips. But he also thought about new beginnings. About how life goes on even when everything seems to be over. About how it's possible to rebuild, brick by brick, day by day, until one morning you wake up and realize pain isn't the first thing you feel anymore. Brian parked in front of the restaurant and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. At 38, he was starting over. Alone, yes, but free. Free from the lie his marriage had become. Free from the betrayal that had poisoned his family. Free to choose better next time. Free to build something real with someone who would value what they had. He got out of the car and walked toward the restaurant, where Sophie was already waiting at a table by the window, smiling when she saw him. And in that moment, Brian knew he'd made the right choice. He'd left the past behind. Let Tessa and Owen deal with the consequences of their actions. He'd chosen to move forward, and that choice made all the difference. Life collects its debts. Not always dramatically or immediately. Sometimes it collects quietly, leaving people alone with their regrets, watching from afar as those they hurt find happiness elsewhere. And maybe that's the most perfect justice of all, not active revenge, but simply the ability to move on and thrive while those who betrayed you remain trapped in the consequences of their own choices. Brian walked into the restaurant and didn't look back. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.